welcome to the Men on the Bus podcast series. Today we will be exploring the fairy tale Jack and the Beanstalk in light of Jungian thought with Irish mental health care professional Stephen Flynn.
Right, so we're online.
We are ready to go.
Okay, the essence of what I'm going to do today is twofold. One of the ones I'm going to try and explain to you is the Jungian definition of a dream. And I'm going to do it through an assumption that the dreamer, which could be you for a moment, imagine that you were the dreamer and you've had a dream and you've woken up, you've awoke with this dream. And it was the dream of Jack and the Beanstalk, which sounds very simple, but for you it would be the big dream. What the heck does this mean? So that's the line I'm taking. So what we'll do as we go along is look at the importance of dream and why it is important. And we all know, we all have a big dream, and that stays with us for years. And we have many, many other dreams that last a day, last a few seconds, and some of them we can't even remember. But we knew we had one. When it comes to a big dream, it's almost like, sometimes like a vision, it just stays with you. And if it stays with you, there's heat in it. So I want the listener to imagine that they had a dream of Jack and the Beanstalk. And then they're left with, what the heck is that about? And I want the listener to consider that they are Jack in the Jack and the Beanstalk story, that they themselves are Jack. So we have this young lad who doesn't know his dad. His dad has been killed by a monster of a man. And Dad was a real nice guy. And he was killed, and all his possessions were taken off him. And the giant went off, or the monster of a man went off into far, far away up in the hills, as the story goes, and took away all of Jack's belongings and all he had a right at birth. So he was left with a mother who was scared to bits in case he came back and killed them both. So here you've got a young lad, no idea about his dad, and a mum who's frightened to death. So he wakes up and he has this dream. What the heck's that about? So what I want you to do is to think, where are you in the dream now? Because the dream goes right through to the point where, in fact, I'll slowly, in case anybody is not familiar with the simple story of Jack and the Beanstalk, shall I just simply read it very quickly? It's a synopsis. It's a kind of a breakdown. Would that be okay to do that?
I think it's a good idea.
Yeah. Well, it was based upon people called Opie and they went back in history and looked at one of the original stories of Jack and the Beanstalk. So Jack was only a baby when the giant killed his dad, and the giant banished his mother and the baby with the threats of death, and he stole the loot and took away to his castle far off. And Jack and his mother were left alone in poverty. Jack was a good-natured but indolent boy. One morning when he was about 14, there was no food in the house except they had a dairy cow, which they'd lived on up until then. So Mum said to Jack, take the cow to the market and sell it and bring back the money because we've got nothing else to live on. So he went off and he met the butcher, and the butcher saw that Jack was a bit naive and persuaded him to sell the cow for magic beans. So the little lad thought, yeah, it must be a really good trade I've done here. So he went home to Mum with the magic beans, and Mum, of course, what? You've sold our only existing animal for magic beans? And he was furious. She was furious with him. And she threw the beans out in the garden and told him off. And the next day, these beans had grown right up into the sky. And it was a connection between Jack and what happened to his dad. But he had no idea what happened to his dad because Mum was too afraid to say anything. So when Mum wasn't looking, the next morning, he looked at it and he climbed up to the top. And there, while he was going along exploring, he met an old lady who told him about his dad and what happened, and told him that the giant lived in that big castle over yonder, and all that he had in there belonged really to him and his dad. He killed his dad, and all that belonged to his dad is there, and the giant's got it. Oh, so Jack thought, right. So he was very cautious at that point, and he went to the castle and he met he met the wife of the giant, and the wife of the giant hid him away because her husband was coming, and she knew that her husband would kill him because he was that way on. He came in and he hammered for his meal, and she fed him, and then the giant fell asleep, and then Jack stole the money that was lying around and ran off, and the giant was still asleep. So he carried it all down home, and he had a load of money. So they lived happily for a while, but the money ran out. So Jack thought, right, I'm going back up again. And Mum says, don't go back up there. You said there's a giant up there. But while his mum was asleep, he nipped up again. And this time he stole a hen that was laid golden eggs. So that when he brought it back, he didn't have to worry about money anymore because this hen kept laying golden eggs and they had money. And they had food as well. So they wanted nothing else in that line. But then on the longest day of the year, Jack said, I'm going to see what else has been nicked from me. So he went up there again, and he had to disguise himself because the wife of the giant, she said she got really into great trouble because all this stuff had been missing and she couldn't explain it. So he said, well, that wasn't me. And he camouflaged himself. So she let him in. And again, the giant was coming back. So she said, quick, and hide. So he hid in the oven again. And this time, the giant had a harp music. So the giant said to the harp, play, harp, play. So the harp started to play beautiful music. And he fell asleep. And so out came Jack. There was the harp. So he grabbed the harp and he ran off. But the dog under the table, which he didn't notice, started to bark and woke up the giant. So the giant said, where's my harp gone? And he ran after Jack, trying to get his harp back. And Jack was quite a young, strong lad. And the giant was a little bit weary and just woke up. So Jack rushed off and got down the beanstalk, and he called his mother over and said, quick, Mum, bring the axe. And Mum brought the axe. And as he reached the ground, he grabbed the axe off Mother, chopped it, and down came the giant smack into the garden under the ground. And there they were, safe with money and they had entertainment. And so they were quite content. But the old lady that he'd met initially, she said, well, I was a young lady, but I didn't look after you. So I was left to grow old. Now you're okay again. I've turned into a young lady again. So maybe there was promise there. So that's the end of Jack and the Beanstalk, as given by the Opis way back in time. Now, is that okay? We'll go on what the interpretation that could be. If you'd had that dream, what would it mean to you? Especially what stage in life are you? Have you got enough money? Do you like music? Are you safe and happy? Do you know all about your parents? And so on. So if you're a young man and you had no dad, or you didn't know him much, or he died young, or wasn't very communicative, or went away, and you're left with who the heck was he? What was he like? And then you start thinking, well, what did a monster kill him, or what? So we start our analysis based upon Jung as to what all this could mean, and see if it means anything to you. So how does that sound? Okay. So we'll go from there.
Perfect.
Right. So the dream analysis in Jung, he first of all said that fairy tales are very symbolic, the deep, and they touch on a deep pattern known to everybody, or available, or relevant to everybody, and the same as myth and the Greek myth. These, and he says also that dreams were very important. If you consider say the Christmas story of Jesus, there were 5 dreams in that to make it all possible, including the wise men. Could call it visions because they were very, very pertinent, but it was something that happened outside of them, like a big dream, like a real dream. So 5 of those occurred to make the Christmas story possible. So nowadays we see dreams as, sure, it's just working out some crap that was happened to me through the day. But what if these dreams do still have meaning for us, and we've abandoned them at our own expense? So if we look at a fairy tale as it were, a myth that is yet to come about, so that stupid little fairy tale of Jack and the Beanstalk, that will still be spoken of and given to children when we're gone. It's very old, and will remain there. So what's keeping it going? Why is it so important? So let's consider that this dream that the person had about Jack and the Beanstalk was a big dream. It was something that was trying to tell him something. And therefore, we look at it in that sense and we see it in that way, that it's a deep pattern. And we need to look at it as a fairy tale, if you like, but with significance. And it's touching what Jung would call the collective unconscious. In other words, it's within us all somewhere, this pattern of mother, security, growing up, knowing one's father, making decisions. So this pattern is common to us all, but in this case, the little lad had no dad and was unaware of what happened. And it's quite common for young men to be brought up in a setting which isn't ideal. And so we're left with interpreting this in a very meaningful way, rather than just discarding it as, sure, it's only a story, for God's sake. So it's about the development of the masculine energy within a person. Jung said, it's quite interesting, Jung said that when a child is born, there's like two rivers inside them. One is all the male energy, and the other one is all the female energy. And these are empty riverbeds. And as the child grows up, these are filled with the male energy and the female energy, which they gather from people around them. So here is a boy quite injured about the male energy because mum was anxious, and the female energy that mum presented was a very anxious woman who wasn't able to settle, and she was as anxious as he was in a different way. And so the little lad grew up in tension, and he didn't develop normally. He became resentful, he became kind of idle and angry, and mum couldn't add to it. She couldn't know where the hell all this was going. She had no structure, she had no security. So this is the no dad bit, and this is what he was left with, these dilemmas. Now, how did he find, or how could he find his way through, given that he had these dilemmas? Now, the dilemmas in him would develop into a kind of a cluster within himself. And this cluster is his fear. He knew something was wrong. He knew mother was upset. He knew mother wasn't kind of at ease. She was always tense. So he knew there was something up, but there was no words to it. And so when he started on this journey, which a boy does, he goes out and ventures out into the world. And the first venture he made, the first real man he met, was the butcher. And the butcher was cute, but that's the nature of men, ordinary men out there. They have to be cute. I mean, the butcher, he killed animals, he served people in a shop, he did bargain. So he met this little lad and he thought, what a naive little boy. And he took advantage, which men can do. It didn't mean any harm other than getting a good bargain. And if the lad's happy, I'm happy. So that was the first real man he met, was the butcher. And the butcher was quite opposite to him because he was naive and the butcher was wise. And now we've got four men, the only four men in the story. Dad, who's dead, who's supposed to be a really nice guy, and the monster of a man who was really cruel and hard. So that's his opposite. So it's like north, south, east, west. And the boy who's naive and the butcher. So there's four men. There's no more than that. And we have three women. One of them changes later. She's an old one when he initially met her, and she changes into a young girl. So in effect, it's like four women, the wife of the monster, his mother, and the old woman who later changed into a young woman. So these are four men and four women. And this is the kind of forces that this young lad had to face that were in himself. This is how he had to develop and learn about womanhood, and he had to learn about manhood. So his journey, going up and taking an adventure, was learning about himself, was learning about his father, and the story, therefore, has significance in his own life. So he can, if he'd stayed without going on the adventure, he may well have turned into a very angry young man, taking advantage of other people and even being quite a nasty person if he hadn't found out what the heck was going on. Because all of that could have remained all his life, and he could have been dependent on his mother, who would have been anxious and tense, not offering the maternal care she could have offered if she was secure. So this is the complex that this young lad is facing. And it's quite common with young lads today who end up fatherless and end up in an area where other kids are quite delinquent, if you like, and maybe drugs would be an answer to them to overcome something they know nothing about and can't do anything about if they don't venture forward and look at what the hell's going on. And the pain they have within with all this, when they do find out, if it isn't resolved, if they don't get back what was stolen from the family, they end up deprived of what is theirs as of right. And what is it which is as of right? It's the right to have money. It's the right to have a fair life and fair share. It's a right to have that on a stable basis, which the hen offers. And it has the right to have listen to good music. Now that's okay so far. So what's the connection here? The go-between. Now I'm just catching up because I've gone through very quickly the way forward. Now, how do we solve all this? Becoming aware, realizing the damage. How does the little lad who holds damage as a kind of a concentration within him, it doesn't go away, all this pain, all this 14 years of being raised without knowing, feeling anxious and what's the point, and becoming a rather careless young man, not realizing he had a job to do in his life, that he could be useful and helpful. Instead, he became resentful and bitter, and mother couldn't offer him anything other than milk. In other words, he would be better off just remaining a mama's boy, which some unfortunates end up doing, and feel a deep resentment that they can't step out into the world, marry, have kids themselves, like their mother did, albeit hers was disastrous, but he had no opportunity to do that. He would end up looking after his mum, and his mum would be happy out that her little boy is looking after him and she doesn't need to worry anymore. But that would be rather an incestuous emotional relationship between the two of them at the boy's expense. So that is one avenue that he could follow. Another avenue he could follow, as I've said, he could end up being bitter and angry and become the very monster that killed his own father because he wouldn't know any different. And to embrace the realization that he has a right in this world, a right to live as others, is what he has to try and find out and recover. So this business of going off and facing this monster and hiding from him, knowing that the monster is dangerous, and monsters, even today, a monstrous behavior of a man, they're dangerous. If you meet one yourself out in the street, he soon let you know how unstable he is and how angry and bitter, so that we ourselves have to be careful approaching the likes. And this is what this young lad had to face. And he himself was, in the story that was given, he was kind of innocent. He was useless around the house. He was careless. This is what was said of him. He was extravagant and quick to overcoming remorse, and rather bad-tempered and silly, and very frightened too. So these were the qualities he developed in that kind of setting. Now, when we start looking his need to become aware, this kind of inner behavior will remain with him in a cluster within him, and it's called a complex. And if it separates from him, then he will have this bothering him all his life and arise in him. So he almost has to reach out to it. And it's not a nice part of himself when he was so unsecure and naughty and misbehaved, and there wasn't any future for him. And this is what can happen as a young man. But to reach out to him, in this case, we had the Beanstalk. Now, if the likes of the Beanstalk isn't available for him to reach back and see what the hell went on, and have some resolution, even via that. You couldn't take everything from the monster, because the monster man, because inside that castle there were people caught and captured. There was a lot more there that he couldn't actually take away. He had to grab what he could and run. And in a little way, when a person is in that position where they are trying to resolve some of these internal conflicts, he has to become aware that he has to steal back some of the stuff with and try and live it, but he will not get back everything that belongs to him. There will be a damage, and how this damage is managed, and he needs to have contact with it and own it and steal from it, but it will always be there, and it could become something that will bother him and become very mischievous in his life, or it can lose so much energy because he's stolen from it that pocket of energy that's within him will not be a dominant. And I think partly that's what happens to people who go wrong. That becomes dominant, and they live in that area within themselves where they feel deprived, they feel nobody cares, they want anything that's around. Why shouldn't I steal it because everybody else has got it? And they steal from others rather than finding out and getting back what belongs to him as of right within himself. And then he can go out into the world with knowledge and understanding and realize that, the dark side of mankind is within him as well, and not something outside of him or that he steps outside and becomes. So this is the way that the adult has to develop and integrate, knowing he has a dark side, knowing he has an acute side, knowing he has also an innocence. So he has all the four things within man that is expressed within the story. He has four aspects of the men that we've touched on. Now, if we look at the feminine, how could the feminine feed him with security and wisdom? The feminine in him, she herself had these four factors which needed herself to become aware, but they were his impression of womanhood that he gained from her. And for the first time, he met two other women. Initially, the old lady, who was mournful because she'd not looked after him spiritually, and then he met the wife, and he had to deceive her, and he also had to deceive his mother, because women in that state aren't helpful. They can't see justice and fairness. Both of them are suppressed, one by a monster or a man, and the other by threats of being killed. So we have two women in his life at that point, and a third who are sorrow and full of sorrow and limited as to being useful to him. It's only when he starts to get back some of the stuff that's needed in life, like money, like continuous security that the hen gave, which is symbolic, because the hen laid the egg and it recurred. So they were never short of money, and hen lay eggs, so there was food. And he could go out and buy food. And then finally, he was able to steal the harp and actually enjoy music. And the harpist, when the harp spoke to the wicked old man and said, "Play, harp, play," the harp said, "Yes, master." And the master of music is the person who listens to it. So any of us can be the master of music if we would but listen to it. And it was only at that point in his life did Jack come into the idea of music and what it meant, and was able to enjoy it in a manner which was restful and developmental. So that was another deprivation of him. He wasn't able to enjoy and have good crack, as they say. Now, what you can meet with people who have this background and who aren't able to contact it with no beanstalks, it were, they can end up cutting themselves as a kind of a language between themselves and this monstrous part of themselves. Because they're in balance. They have a very low part of themselves, but they also have a very high part of themselves, because the seesaw, where there's low, there's a corresponding high. But the corresponding high is undeveloped. It's not lived in. But the low is where the ego develops. That's where the person lives. And now and then you hear this voice condemning them, because it's a very high voice within them saying how stupid they are and what they could have done and what they should have done. And they have within themselves an unfriendly, too cute, too wise old guy who is not part of them, because they haven't embraced it and get a balance. Because once the heavy part starts to lift, as in the case of Jack, he started to steal back what belonged to him, then the balance started, the seesaw began to level. And the other side of the level meant that the high part of him that would have been left untouched started to join in and become less aggressive, less judgmental, so that there was a balance. And we have that within ourselves. Conscience, you should have done this, why didn't you do that? As opposed to beating oneself up and cutting oneself or doing something untoward to oneself in order to make it known the wide distinction between what you should have done and what you are. So you end up calling yourself stupid and idiotic, rather than hopping on and saying, yeah, okay, I'm not perfect, but I do my best, and keeping at it. So this is the dilemma that mankind faces if he isn't allowed to meet this need to take back in that pocket of deprivation. And how does he get it back? Well, his mother can't offer it to him because she's too afraid to speak. Or mother would be injured in normal life, where if the young lad's grown up in normal life, and dad's left and she feels deprived, she feels uncertain, what can he do? He can't go to his mother and get explanation and get comfort. Not of the kind that's constructive and enabling. It's rather injurious, and her needing support from a little boy who isn't able to offer it because he's got no example of how to do that. And this is where the child then grows up with this lack within himself. So if the dreamer were to wake up with this dream, they could then say, we could now say, each of us, where am I in that dream? Have I completed all this? Do I now own the 4 men within me? Do I accept I have 4 men within me? The man that could be monstrous, there's plenty of them around. Are we a man who's always sweet and nice, naive, like Dad was? He must have been sweet and nice, because how can we let a monster of a man come near him and kill him? And by all accounts in the story, when you read it, Dad encouraged and made friends with this monster of a man, who then was able to bring him down. And if we're not aware that there are kind of people like that, and we live in this naive, I'm Mr. Wonderful, then we ourselves are out of balance. So the nice dad was out of balance, and the nasty man was obviously out of balance. And then we've got the wise, cute whore of a butcher. So we've left with these 4. Now, integrating these 4 into ourselves needs to be done, and it's accepting, first and foremost, that there is that in us. There is, as one woman said to me years ago, all men are rapists. Yes, but I've decided not to be. And that is how it is. So there's this kind of stuff being thrown at you. So yes, that is within me, and also the good is within me. But if I try and be good, I'll be quite naive. Then again, I have to be cute, because there are people out there, who would do me if I'm naive and say, yes, oh, that's wonderful. Oh yeah, I'll sell this bag of magic beans. So we have to be also aware. And all these 4 aspects of manhood have to be balanced within. And how does an individual grown up without having had an example given to us, fed within that empty river as he develops, what kind of imagery fills the river of manhood? what kind of imagery fills the image of womanhood? Scared mother who holds on to him, who just continues to play hell with him and doesn't offer anything. And so he needs to step out of that. That is the male role, to step out and go and seek and learn. And that was the story of our fellow. Now I've made it very succinct and simple, but the dream itself is about looking at these symbols in life and becoming aware that each stage that Jack went through is a symbolic stage. The symbolic stage of being the naive youth, the symbolic stage of meeting a cute hoard of a man, but harmless enough, just that's making a living, that's what he did. Yes, that's needed, and you could be fair with it, which he was not. And so all these factors need to be embraced as we go through life and realize slowly, carefully, the nature of us men, and within that, try and get the balance so that you hold all of those, because there is a need sometimes to get angry and stand your ground, and there is a need sometimes to yeah, okay, I agree with you, I'm heading off, this is dangerous. So we need all those qualities integrated. But if they are not integrated and form little pockets of pain and hurt, which steal away what belongs to us, and we have to go and try and rob them back. And notice what it was said, that the third time he went up to collect, to steal something from the giant, he chose the longest time of the year, the longest day, because he needed absolute awareness. He couldn't continue going there to steal back anytime he wanted, and he couldn't waltz up, he had to almost hide himself. He had to be careful of going into that world because it was bloody dangerous. But at the same time, within it is the good stuff. Now, when a child grows up and doesn't have that ability to get back in there, then he loses the love and the ability to earn money. He loses the prospect of seeing a mature woman, of seeing and understanding a woman who's young and eventually offers a great deal of prospect. He's left with a mother who is still anxious, and he's left with, if he ever went near it, he would be in danger of being overwhelmed if he tried to go near that part that's killed his father. So we're left with a person, the dream would mean that he wakes up and finds himself unable. Now, how does he go back? He needs to go back carefully. He needs to steal back the good part of him from that wicked part of him, so that he can enjoy life, so that he can participate and become normal, or attempt to become normal and enjoy what others enjoy. So that's the essence of a very simple story about Jack and the Beanstalk. And I can elaborate on it at length in terms of interpreting the dream, the interplay between the conscious and the unconscious that's within us all, and how this collective unconscious that we all have, all those types of humans are within every man. So it's not just a matter of a silly little simple tale. It's a matter of this is within us all. So regarding the dream, we need to know how we can explore and gather and gain access in a safe way. So that's the end of the story so far. Right. Well, what I'm left with now is I've almost explained away the detail of the meaningfulness of it all, reiterating a little of the same concepts without going into the dream, how to restore what is as of right, the qualities, and so on. I'm just thinking here, I'm almost stuck in my own ditch, and I'm thinking how we can elaborate, because I've got pages and pages here of what I experienced. For instance, I'll just say what I came across in my practice. Yeah, I'll just find there's one or two places here, for instance. Right. A boy's father had died suddenly when he was about 5 years old, and it was a large family. So everybody was preoccupied with their own pain of the loss of their father. So this young lad, I met him when he was about 14 or so, but he was still knocking around with 5 and 6 year olds, and he was 14. He was a nice boy.
Yeah.
And what happened was that he didn't go through the grief that was within him of the loss of his father. And then he had a stepfather, and there was resentment because he hadn't resolved the death of his own father, and he was this strange man trying to take over. So there was conflict between the two of them, and he was left feeling immature. So I went back with him in time to when he lost his father and how he was isolated in a room at the time of the death in the dark, weeping away at the loss of his dad, isolated when everybody else was still holding their own grief and they'd forgotten about him because he was the youngest. And then he was able to face his own grief, and he was able to say goodbye to his father in a manner that was normal and accepting that his father did die. And as he continued to do so and work through his grief, he was then able to relate to youngsters of his own age. And the conflict between him and his stepfather was reduced to a point where he managed to get on with his own life. And I met him later in life, and he was, quite an integrated young man. So there's an example, even just the loss of a good father. If that's not resolved, it can end up being trapped in grief. And when you look at Jack, he didn't even have an idea what the hell happened. Didn't even know. Did he have a dad? He must, at least the mother might have related that to it. So there's an example of what it means. And if we look at the story, as I put down here, I've broken it down into 10 aspects. And the baby and the father dying, which was left in dilemma. The second one was when about the cow and when he had to meet the clever man. The third part is about the magic beans. Now he was about 14, beans, young man. So he went into puberty. He became an adult, if you like. He then had the right to, he was a young man who was able to contact or become a father himself about that age. So he started to embrace manhood and not knowing quite what the hell manhood involved. So the beans was symbolic of him needing to go and find out what manhood was at that age. And then we look at the anger of mother and wanted to keep him back and not wanting to go. And so he eventually had to climb the beanstalk without his mother's agreement and go against her, because what he was left with was a mother who knew it all but wouldn't speak of it. She had no future within her. She was frightened of the future. And Jack held, or the male within him held the secrets of the future. So he had to go and climb the beanstalk. In other words, he had to go and accept his manhood and look what it meant in the outside world. So it could be seen in that manner. And then the first visit to the castle, and him having to disguise him, meeting the old woman, and she telling him about his past and all the rest, which means that he then was, because he'd ventured out and started to grow, then the feminine within him started to grow. And he was then allowed to find out what was being suppressed by the woman. It's a little bit like Adam and Eve. Eve bit the apple of knowledge first, and then man came along and said and took a bite afterwards. And there is another, fantasy story which is in the Bible, and the implication of that is that the woman knows, but it can't articulate and can't make it reality. So when the man knows, he can then put structure to it. He can then offer resolution, but the woman is left with the fact. So in a way, when Eve bit from the apple, I sometimes wonder how long it is before the man was able to have a bite as well. Maybe he was still waiting to have a bite. It's just a thought. Anyway, so that was the other part. So he was then, because he developed a little bit masculine, his feminine started to develop. And then he was able to take back what was rightly his, which goes on to the point number 6 in the story. And then we go here that there were 3 possessions, of which he had to make the journey and return several times: the gold and the silver, which is temporary, and the more permanent, and then the egg, and then finally enjoyment. And then goes on about the 3 visits, and then he reaches, was able to cut down the beanstalk with the help of his mother, because she got the axe for him. In other words, he still needed the feminine, and the giant fell within the grounds of his own home, but was under the ground and not dangerous, but actually still there, but underground. It was not dominant anymore. And so this dark side of ourselves is, if you like, under the very feet we walk.
Thank you for joining us for episode 1. Join us next time when we will explore the fairy tale Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs, drawing upon the work of Carl Gustav Jung.